Did it say that it's recording yet over there on
It
your
said
end?
it's being live streamed.
All right, great. Okay, everyone. Shalom and welcome to the Aruka Holistic Life Academy podcast. I'm your host, Mayim Vega, former NASA computer scientist turned naturopathic herbalist and holistic life coach. And at Aruka, we help aspiring healers learn how to take charge of their health, transform their families, and build thriving, purpose-driven businesses. And today, I'm honored to introduce a very special guest by the name of David Crow. David has been a clinician, consultant, researcher, and educator in natural medicine for over 40 years. And he is one of the first Westerners to train and be licensed in Chinese medicine. And he also studied Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine through traditional internships in Nepal and India. And David is not only a world-renowned speaker, author, and thought leader, but also a pioneer in bringing essential oils and aromatherapy into clinical practice. He's taught extensively across the US, Canada, and Europe, and since 2015 has been one of the most respected faculty members at the Shift Network, where over 10,000 students have learned from him. And he's even founded and hosted the Plant Medicine Summit, which has reached over 300,000 people worldwide. Through his work, David integrates botanical medicine, ecology, and spirituality, empowering people to reimagine healthcare and become their own self-care experts. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. That was an extensive introduction.
Yes, absolutely. And before we get started, we wanted to talk about spiritual traditions in herbalism and healing. And as a Jew, I wanted to share a tradition with you that we have, a legend that we have, which is that we once had a book given by the angels that was the original, I guess, herbal medicine reference encyclopedia, so to speak. And it stated there and how to use plants and herbs in order to attain health and healing. But the legend goes that the creator took the book away from us because we were too dependent on the book, and we were not we were using it to bypass spirituality and its role in healing, and we were trying to kind of use medicine the way that modern medicine uses pharmaceuticals today, kind of ignoring the spiritual and the holistic aspects of it. And so anything from that, as if we believe in that legend, then anything that we continue to have that has not been rediscovered through science and discovery, etc., would be only from memory and oral tradition passed down between families and things like that. I think that's a beautiful way to start our conversation. And I know you have much more to say on this topic and different legends to share as well.
Well, we could talk about that legend for hours and its meaning and symbology and similarity with other legends in other cultures around the world, because it's a kind of a universal story, actually, about how humans learn, how humans have received knowledge. That's kind of the first story that's in there. How do we, uh, where did we learn about nature? And so one of the things that I can add from other cultures, because my training and experience is mostly either in the classical Asian traditions of Chinese Ayurvedic Tibetan medicine, or in some of the more shamanic traditions from South America. But I have also studied extensively in the European herbology, and that's where a lot of this overlaps directly with your story. But in all cultures, we find that there are these kind of mythological origins, uh, divine origins, divine creation stories about plants and about the knowledge of plants and why plants are here on the earth and how we should relate to them, and how they are manifestations of divinity. So this is a very rich topic for discussion, for sure. And there are many parallels to that legend that you just shared, almost identical stories actually from Asia as well. So I think that it's a beautiful way to start because what it's telling us is that plant medicine has divine dimensions to it, and spiritual teachings have plant medicine in them, and spiritual lineages have uh, many different teachings about what plants are and how we should relate to them. So this has always been woven in to all traditions. It's still very much alive in Ayurvedic medicine, for example, Tibetan medicine. There's still many, many spiritual dimensions about how plants are to be used and how we can relate to them. And it's obvious, probably the most obvious way is that plants have always been gathered with prayer and reverence. The harvesting of the plants has always been closely linked to awareness that they are conscious beings, and that if we're going to dig them out of the ground, that we say thank you to them, we talk to them. There's everywhere in the whole world. It's a universal practice to give thanks to plants before we harvest them, before we ingest them. And it's a universal practice also to pray over medicines as they are being made from plants. And it's a universal practice also to uh, pray as medicines, herbal medicines are being taken, you see. And so this is everywhere. This is all part of just our human psychology. It's part of our human spirituality. Uh, because we have always had some sense in every culture, every time and place, we've had some sense that nature is sacred and the plants are sacred. And especially when they cure us, that we have a great appreciation for that. And we can actually see that plants contain not just biochemical compounds that have an effect physiologically, but those biochemical compounds are actually the creation uh, of the plant. The plant created those compounds, and therefore they are the expression of the plant's intelligence. And so therefore we have lots to talk about.
All right. Well, before we get into that, everything, that is a lot to talk about. But could we start with being in the field of natural medicine for over 40 years, what first inspired you to begin on this journey?
Well, I was always very interested in other cultures. I think it was probably because uh, in my childhood, my father had a great interest in Greek mythology. He was an English teacher in Southern California, but he was interested in Greek mythology, and he took the family to live in Greece. And so I was exposed at a young age to other cultures, which was not all that common, for boys growing up in Southern California in the 50s, So I was exposed. Some of my earliest memories were actually temples and sacred places in throughout the Mediterranean. And so I was kind of that was impressed on my psyche at an early age. And so when I came back to Southern California, I wasn't really normal. I had an interest in other cultures and spirituality. And I was always studying this on my own. I was always interested in other cultures and their spiritual traditions. And so I was always reading about these, fantastical things in other places. And I was very interested in the druids, and I was very interested in the yogis, and I was very interested in the shamans, all before any of that came to the United States. So when things started to arrive in the United States very early, I kind of jumped at the opportunity to go exploring, and I actually went through Central America when I was still a teenager, actually. I went walking through Central America and met the indigenous people and began to encounter some of the old traditions in Mexico and Guatemala. And then when acupuncture and Chinese medicine first came to the United States, uh, and there were rumors that there was going to be an acupuncture college opening, I got very interested. And I basically became one of the first Westerners to be trained in San Francisco at the first acupuncture college that opened up. And so I was in the first graduating class. I was in the first wave of people who were licensed as practitioners of Chinese medicine. And this opened the door into Asian traditions. And at the same time, I became aware that Chinese medicine was really modernized. It wasn't really very traditional. It had lost a lot of its spiritual roots, its connection to prayer and contemplative practice. And so in my research, I found that these aspects of plant medicine were still very much alive in Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine in the classical lineages of the Himalayas and India. So I was in clinical practice for several years in the Bay Area doing acupuncture and Chinese medicine, in the first group of practitioners doing that. But I was very interested in going to the roots, going to the source, where the spirituality of plants was still intact, and the spirituality of healing was much more emphasized. And so I uh, closed my clinic and moved to the Himalayas, and I ended up studying with first a Tibetan doctor who is a very, very special person. He was an old Tibetan Lama who had trained and practiced in a very classical way in the Himalayas in Tibet. And then when the Chinese came in and took over Tibet, he was imprisoned. And he maintained his spiritual practice throughout his imprisonment. And then he escaped from Tibet and he came to Nepal. And I met him uh, in Kathmandu, and he took me as his only Western student. And I was very fortunate to receive an actual internship, a classical kind of training. And I went back and I lived quite a while, different journeys back and forth many times, and spent several years actually studying with him. And I received the real old-fashioned kind of training where you actually uh, go out and dig the herbs and work with the monks to chop them up and make these preparations and so forth. And when I was there in Kathmandu, I began to meet the other kinds of doctors who did this, which are the Ayurvedic doctors. And then that took me into many travels into India as well. So I was actually one of the first to do a lot of training in Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine actually there on the ground, hands-on, uh, classical kind of internships. And in the process of doing that, one of the most obvious things that I witnessed was that these medicines were inseparable from the spiritual practices. And so the medicines would be prepared with prayer. The plants would be harvested with prayer. And then later, in further explorations in South America, I also came across the same thing. And then in my studies of old European medicine, I came across the same things, the monastery gardens of Hildegard von Bingen, I mean, all of these things. Persian medicine, it's all entwined with prayer. It's all entwined with contemplative practices. It's all entwined with uh, the sacred dimensions of healing. Every aspect, every culture, every lineage, every time and place. This is what we find, is that plant medicine is inseparable from spirituality.
My guess would be that the reason why acupuncture and Chinese medicine in the Western world today is divorced from spirituality is number one, the same reason that it has become more accepted and widespread here because America is so kind of, devoid of spirituality, that was one of the ways that it was able to enter into America. And perhaps also number two, because communist China, they wanted the benefits of the healing, but not necessarily everything that spirituality would bring with it, freedom of thought and things like that.
Right, that's a very important point. And there's a historical basis for this, and you're absolutely correct. So uh, it's an interesting question. If these medical systems are so effective, then why was there so much disease? You know, and uh, it turns out that there's different forms of medicine that do different things better and not as well. But when Western medicine, early allopathic medicine, was exported to China, there were some aspects of it that were really miraculous and that Chinese medicine couldn't do. And then when antibiotics came along, it was even more dramatic. Okay. And so antibiotics, the appearance of antibiotics really inhibited and discouraged people from using their own medical traditions because antibiotics were miracle drugs when they first came out. And they were saving millions of people's lives from infections that a lot of times herbal medicine couldn't treat. You see, and so what we find historically then is that wherever Western culture went in, the first response was that people really embraced it and they absorbed it and they neglected their own traditions. And this is true in India with Ayurveda and in Tibet with Tibetan medicine and China with Chinese medicine. People abandoned. They thought it was old-fashioned and they rebelled against it, actually. They wanted Western culture. And so when the Cultural Revolution happened in China, then the old classical Chinese medicine was rejected. And it was rejected as unscientific and, superstitious. And there are some aspects of that, but, allopathic medicine has some unscientific superstitions also. But what happened was that Chinese medicine was transformed by the Communist Party. And it was made to look more Western because people wanted more Western science. And so we have a term TCM, which means, traditional Chinese medicine. But really, what TCM was when it came to the United States was traditional communist medicine. You're absolutely correct. It was stripped away from its original spiritual roots. Okay. Now, in terms of your observation that that's how it is now, I would say that has to be considered in a broader framework because really there's a medical tradition and then there are the individual practitioners. You see, so we could say that allopathic medicine is not spiritual, pharmaceutical drugs are not spiritual, but there are a lot of very spiritual doctors, you see, who are expressing spirituality with their care of their patients in that medical system. And likewise, we also find that in Chinese medicine, there's a lot of, mediocre acupuncturists and herbalists who aren't necessarily spiritual. And then there's some really outstanding healers. And many of these outstanding healers are also really spiritual people. Now, traditionally, when a person received training in Chinese medicine, it was inseparable from the Taoist practices of self-cultivation, of spirituality, cultivation of vitality, cultivation of what's called Shen, spirit. Spiritual cultivation was always part of the medical training. And that's a very interesting aspect of classical Asian medicine, is that it is clearly stated that the purpose of plant medicine is to cultivate our spiritual dimensions, our spiritual consciousness, and to use plants to first get rid of disease so that we can focus on our spiritual practices, which are in essence the same everywhere, and then to live a long, healthy life with an ultimate spiritual goal, which is defined in classical Asian traditions as illumination, enlightenment, liberation, emancipation, and it's very similar in a lot of ways to some of the ultimate spiritual goals defined in Christianity and Judaism. And so what we find is that historically, the student and practitioner of Chinese medicine also practiced Qigong and Tai Chi to keep themselves healthy, but that also cultivated a kind of meditative state. And that meditative state was also understood to be part of self-cultivation to be a good doctor. So in other words, when you trained as a doctor in these classical Asian systems, you didn't just train to be a doctor. You were training to be a spiritual person. And you were taught that compassion is the foundation of your work. And so it's not like you just, went to medical school and they didn't give you any spiritual insights. If you were studying to be a classical doctor in the Himalayas, you were also studying to be a good person. Okay, you were studying to be a compassionate doctor. You were studying to cultivate these spiritual dimensions. Now that's still there. Okay, it's just that it's not as formalized and complete as a system anymore. But even when I was training in acupuncture 40 years ago, there were people who were already seeking out, like myself, they were already seeking out these deeper spiritual traditions. And many people ended up moving into the self-cultivation practices of doing Tai Chi and Qigong in Chinese medicine. You see, or doing different types of meditative, contemplative practices, self-inquiry practices, and so forth, from the different Asian lineages. And also, many people who are are and were from the Christian and Jewish faith actually got interested in Asian medicine, you see. And so they got their medical training in Asian medicine. And so this is the kind of blending of cultures that we have had, because I know some of the top practitioners of Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine actually come from different faiths altogether, but they have absorbed and kind of, transformed and integrated and translated these teachings into their own personal expression, you see. So it's not really so much about whether allopathic medicine is spiritual or not, or whether Chinese medicine has any of its spiritual roots left or not. It's really about the spirituality of every doctor, spirituality of every practitioner. And that's, all the way from people who have no medical license at all, who are practicing, folk medicine, all the way to high-level surgeons, that rule applies. So that's a very astute observation. Good topic.
Yeah, I something you said about the antibiotics and how it was like a miracle. And then from that, we kind of threw away all of the herbal and healing traditions after certain things. And it seems to be the pattern in history, not only when it comes to medicine, but like when the Europeans came to now the USA and everything that they had, the weapons, everything seemed so miraculous where they kind of let their guard down at first and said, oh, you must be superior, you must be divine. And they forgot everything that they already had. And so we see that also in with Western medicine and the advent of all these pharmaceutical drugs, they seem so powerful. And I think that, really the creator, he's always, so I refer to the creator as father and things like that. But so he's always giving us gifts, throughout human history. And the original was everything through his creation, the plants, the sunshine, etc. And then we advance and we grow in our knowledge and technology and allopathic medicine, etc. And we discover wonderful things on our own, which I believe we were meant to. That's part of evolution as humanity. But then we get so arrogant in thinking that what we have, newly created is superior to divine wisdom. That's the foundation, actually, of everything that we have. And I think that's really the problem is the arrogance and just casting away everything old and replacing it with things that are new. And this has happened with technology. I talk about this because I was formerly a computer scientist at NASA. Is that we wonderful things with technology and even AI that's beginning to happen. But then we started forgetting the wisdom and the healing power of basic things like sunshine and fresh air and exercise. And
Hmm.
we need modern science to convince us again that these things are important, and very simple things like sleep, and circadian rhythms and things like that. And it's like, well, this is just part of um, our ancient traditions, all these things, just part of normal life. And because we've been so dependent on technology and human advancement, we forgot the already established and proven wisdom of the divine and creation and things like that.
Hmm. That's absolutely correct. And I think that I could share some insights and experience about how to restore that. And the most fundamental way is to understand that the plants have intelligence. Okay. And if we understand that intelligence, then we understand that the biosphere has intelligence. And we can see that the human body has intelligence. Okay. And if we uh, kind of reframe um, some of the spiritual concepts into the context of intelligence, then it opens up a completely different way of uh, experiencing spirituality. Okay, which is non-religious. It's biospheric spirituality. It's ecological spirituality. All right. So one of the things that has been very helpful for me is that in my studies of classical Asian medicine, I learned concepts like qi and prana, life force. Okay, and these are all universal. Uh, these are there in ancient Greek concepts, ancient Greek medicine, Persian medicine, Judaic medicine. It's universal. But most people, when they study that in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, it's just a concept. But I was very fortunate because as I was studying these traditions, I was also engaged in meditation practice, contemplative practice, especially body-based awareness. And I was able to explore some of the implications of these teachings. And one of the really simple insights that was very profound has to do with the intelligence of the body. And if we actually understand the true intelligence of the body, it's a spiritual revelation. The intelligence coming face to face with the intelligence of the body is the same as coming face to face with God. And a very simple way we can start to understand that intellectually is that we can ask, well, how many things are happening in the body uh, in any instant? One instant, how many things? Well, science tells us that in one instant, quadrillions of things happen. Okay, that's unimaginable, unfathomable, ungraspable for the mind to comprehend. Quadrillions of things happening every instant. And then we go through and we say, well, how many of these things do we have control over? And we can go through and we can see we can't control any of it. Okay. People say, well, I can control my breath. No, you can train yourself to hold your breath a little bit. People say, oh, I can control my mind. I don't buy that at all. Okay. People say, well, you can control your diet. And I say, well, if you're lucky and you're not traveling too much, okay, and you have a lot of money, maybe, but not most people. And then when it comes down to it, you go through the list of what are all the things that we have direct control over in the body. We find there's only one thing, and that's voluntary muscles. And even that breaks down and can become traumatized and injured, and we can lose that function. So really, the only thing physically that we have direct control over is voluntary muscles. And then everything else is involuntary. Okay, the heart is pumping because of involuntary impulses. Digestion, hormonal balance, liver detoxification, everything is happening on its own. Okay, and therefore, what we come in contact with is that there's a level of intelligence that's inside the body that is much more intelligent than our human mind can even comprehend. Now, if we look at the body that way, then we ask, well, what is this intelligence? What is doing all of this? What is making my body operate like this? And then we can see with further study and contemplation that all the body sensations that are arising because of the movement of all of this activity. And this activity is all being done for us. All right. We can't do anything about it. It's all being done for us. And then if we look at that aspect of how this life force is doing all of this for us, then we see, well, this life force is actually doing everything for everybody, and it's doing everything in all the plants. And therefore, what we can actually begin to develop is an appreciation of how life force itself is animating all forms of life. Okay. And life force itself is giving birth to all forms of life and then maintaining them and growing them and aging them and then declining them. Okay. And so this is the foundation of spirituality in the classical Asian systems, is recognizing that there is a life force and that that life force is universal and it is highly intelligent. And this is a source of very rich teachings that say, for example, that this life force that is animating all the functions in the body, prana, that it is actually, the word prana means life force, but it also means intelligence. And so it's the intelligence of the life force. And then with a little further study, we can say, well, where did that intelligent life force come from? All right. And then what we find is that in traditions such as the Vedas, where there is very much a kind of monotheistic view of God, okay, it is said that prana, the intelligence of the life force, is emanated from God. And it emanates into the body and it animates the body and then it withdraws from the body. But it's also emanated into all forms of life. It's animated into the plants. It's animated into the creatures. It's animated into the biosphere. And therefore, with this kind of teaching, this kind of insight, what it leads us to is the opportunity to begin to pay attention directly to the presence of God in everything. So it's a physical thing, you see, and that has been probably the most profound implication of classical Asian medicine that I've been able to delve into and have direct experiences of, which is that to simply be aware of the body sensations arising, that this is an expression of God. You see, the fact that I can speak, the fact that you can hear, the fact that we can see, these are miracles of creation. If we go back and we look at how the organs were created, for example, we didn't create them. The creator gave us organs. Okay. Well, if the creator gave us organs, then they must be working. And if the creator gave us organs and they are working, then that means that the creator is inherent in our ability to see and hear and taste and smell. And ultimately, if we follow this entire line of teaching, and this is very deeply articulated in classical spirituality. If we follow all of this, what we actually can come to is the self-realization that we are the expression of the Creator in form, that the biosphere of the Earth is a sacred creation full of divine cosmological intelligence, and that ultimately it is not us as individuals who are experiencing it. It is creation experiencing itself through its forms. And this is actually directly accessible to everybody. We just have to know how to look at it and how to shift out of our individual view and to move towards gradually a deeper kind of intimacy with the process that's happening inside of us. So that's kind of the root of classical Asian spirituality, but it's also a universal thing that's found everywhere.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I really love that. And a lot of what you said is actually just very logical statements, not statements of faith or anything like that at all, but just very logical.
It's
How
medical. It's medical and it's scientific and it's biological and it's ecological. And that's what's always intrigued me about the implications of these different lineages is that spirituality is not something somewhere else. Spirituality is right now in our physical experience of life.
I
So
like, sorry, go ahead.
you're correct. It's very logical.
Yeah, I like I don't remember, there's one rabbi that I listened to, Daniel Lapin, and I like his explanation of what is the difference between spirituality and physical. What's the difference between something physical and spiritual? And the only difference is that something spiritual is you can't see it. You can understand it, you can talk about it, you just cannot see it. But it exists, it is there, it has power, it affects things and does things and things like that.
I would agree with that up to a point, but if we follow the logic that I have just presented, then we can also see that that is not fully true because right now I see light. And if I really understood the mystery of physics of light, I would be seeing God. And if I really appreciated the power of the sun, as the creative power of our solar system, then I would be seeing God, you see. And likewise, that's how we can transform the mundane sensory experiences. Because really, the difference between spirituality and ordinary consciousness is something in our own mind. Okay, because if we really understood the nature of creation, we would realize that we are living in creation as it is unfolding. And that creation is unimaginable power. It's the unimaginable power of the sun, and it's the unimaginable power of water and earth, and the unimaginable intelligence that has created all things. And that includes us, and that includes our organs, and it includes our metabolism. And so again, if we follow that logic, which is medical logic and is scientific and is biological logic, if we look at it that way, then we actually arrive at a different conclusion than what your rabbi says. And the conclusion is much more like what Rumi says, okay? And what Rumi said was, it is closer to you than you are to yourself, okay? And therefore, what we find is that it's everywhere. It's everything, okay? Spirit is everything all the time in every dimension of mind, consciousness, medicine, physical body, physical experience, everything is spirit ultimately, but we just don't see it and we don't feel it. And that is also clearly articulated why and how that happens in the classical Asian traditions. And it is clearly stated that that is purely a matter of the function of our mind, okay? That It's not a matter of whether creation is happening or not. It's a matter of whether our mind is perceiving it or not. And therefore, there is a clear path of spiritual evolution in human beings that has to do with training the mind to be more in alignment with reality.
Absolutely. So, a lot of different directions we could go with that, but I
Yeah.
want to talk about the practical. How do we translate that those ideas that you're saying to, physical, maybe not just I don't want to say physical, just to personal, that's a better word, to personal holistic health and healing for someone.
Well, this is an excellent topic, and this has a lot to do with the spiritual dimensions of illness and suffering and healing and transformation. And it has practical applications when it comes to using medicine, whether it's allopathic or natural medicine. So the fundamental issue that you are raising here has to do with the meaning of suffering, okay, and the meaning of healing and the meaning of illness, okay. And therefore, uh, we can we can ask a basic question: why is there so much suffering in the world? Why is there so much illness and disease? And why is life so hard? Okay. Well, there are two answers. There is just suffering, and then there is suffering that has a purpose. Okay. And in a certain way, suffering is inherent in all life. Okay, because we have bodies and they give us pleasure and they give us pain, and we get hungry and we get thirsty and we get old and the joints break down and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And, you know, even, that which is pleasurable turns painful, and being born and giving birth is painful, and getting old and dying is painful. And so pain and suffering are inherent in life. And that's not just for humans, that's for all animals and even plants and even microbes. Okay. Everything in life is suffering. And that is very much why, especially in the last 5,000 years of human history, there's been an increased questioning process, you see. If we look at spiritual history of humanity, it's only been fairly recently that religions have appeared, okay, and that spiritual practices have appeared. And they seem to be in relation to a higher level of cognition and the world having more suffering, okay? And so the spiritual lineages then are asking, is there a solution to suffering? And this is actually a fairly high level of human cognitive evolution to be able to ask that question. Is there an answer to suffering? Okay. Now, when it comes to illness, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to the aging process and all of that, then we have two responses, two fundamental human responses. One response is that we suffer, but a higher level of response is that we view it and experience it with a spiritual perspective. And so therefore, we have, as humans, a unique cognitive capacity to transform suffering into something meaningful, which plants don't have, animals don't have. We have a cognitive capacity to inquire, why are we suffering? Why am I suffering? And if we are ready, if we are educated, if we are prepared, if we're oriented, then we can answer it with a spiritual response. Now, research is coming out, sociological medical research is coming out, that is showing that there's a huge difference in how people get well or not with certain kinds of diseases. And the fundamental difference is whether people view the disease as a spiritual opportunity or not. Okay. So therefore, it's a basic reality that we have disease. It's a basic reality that we get old. It's a basic reality that we suffer. But we have a unique cognitive capacity to transform the suffering into a spiritual process. And that spiritual process is universal in all cultures and times and places. And the spiritual process asks, what is beyond this? Okay. And this is defined in different terms, but it all is pointing to the same thing, that there is a transcendent, ultimate, absolute. Okay. And it could be called God, and God could be named in 1,000 ways. It could be called Goddess, and she could be named in 1,000 ways. It could be called enlightenment or moksha, emancipation from bondage. It could be called virtually anything from any culture. But what it points to is that our human cognitive capacity is able to conceptualize that there is a higher purpose than just suffering, and that suffering seems to be part of our human nature where we can respond to it in different ways. And what we see with human nature is that a lot of people just suffer and they don't actually use it for spiritual practice. But then there are people, and I have heard many, many stories like this. People say cancer was my greatest teacher. Okay. Cancer is what woke me up. Cancer is what brought me to God. Cancer is what put me on the path of spiritual cultivation. Cancer is what got me out of my bad habits. Okay. So, in other words, we have the capacity then to transform illness and suffering into a spiritual path. Now, this also seems to be kind of an archetype in, in the human psyche, in the human spiritual endeavors, the human spiritual story, which is that suffering seems to be the catalyst that brings many people to a state of divinity. Okay. Apotheosis, the process of transforming ourselves into divinity. Frequently, if we look at the life stories of the saints and the holy people everywhere in the world, it's frequently a crisis that got them motivated, you see. And so with natural medicine, we have that opportunity to transform everything into a spiritual practice. We have the opportunity to meditate directly on pain. And this is one of the really interesting, unique clinical applications of traditional Buddhist Vipassana body-based mindfulness meditation that's being applied now in the West, which is non-sectarian and it's non-religious. It's simply observation of body sensations arising and dissolving. And if we go deeply enough into pure metacognition, just pure mindfulness, then a very profound change happens in consciousness, and we no longer experience body sensations in the same way. We no longer experience, I am feeling pain. We simply feel sensations as energy. And people can break through to where they still are in pain, but they no longer are touched by the pain. Okay. And so therefore, in the meditative traditions, especially, there is the opportunity to actually transcend pain physically in our consciousness. But that's a pretty high level, and most people can't do that. But on the other hand, illness, first of all, creates the opportunity, opens a door where people can practice self-inquiry. And many people in the field of natural medicine, this is what natural medicine means to them. It means asking, why am I sick? And that will frequently take people into, well, I've been I've been holding this anxiety in my body for 40 years. No wonder my nervous system and stomach are all out of order. And so it becomes an opportunity then to do deeper healing at an emotional level, at a psychological level, to clean up the messes that people have been, avoiding for decades, to get out of toxic relationships, to clean up the self-medication, to do all of these kind of things to change positively. And again, this has to do with the individual orientation because many people don't do that. They just say, well, I'm just going to take the drugs, take the painkillers, do the cancer treatment. They don't actually say, well, why is this? They don't translate the symptoms as wisdom. They don't translate the pain as a message of the intelligence. They just say, well, this is something I have to block, cover it up. Okay, but everybody has that opportunity when illness comes to go deeper into their process of self-inquiry, to go deeper into the exploration of why am I sick and what does this sickness have to teach me? Okay. And then it opens up into all the practical applications that we can improve our diet. All right. And if we're improving our diet, then automatically that we're improving our relationship with the ecosystem, you see, because we're becoming much more mindful of organic food and where it's coming from and the people who are taking care of the soil. And then it can take us into the use of herbal medicine. And in the use of herbal medicine, we have another opportunity to enter into spiritual practices. And so universally, what is found is that herbal medicine was always accompanied with prayer, ceremony, ritual, both in the harvesting of the plants, the making of the medicine, and the consuming of the medicine. And this is why you always see everywhere in every culture prayers to the plants and prayers. This is what I teach also on a practical basis that don't just take a handful of pills. All right, so you got some turmeric there, and yeah, okay, you got some magnesium, you got some fish oil, all right, and somebody told you to take all these things. That's a terrible food combination, okay? Don't just take a handful of pills on an empty stomach. Sit down, you have your tea, you regard the tea as a sacred thing. You transform your own mind to perceive divinity in that cup of tea, because what is that tea? That tea is a water extract of a plant. Now, how sacred is water? Water is a form of God. Without that water, we perish. Water is life-giving. Now, if we pause and we remember that, that changes our brain chemistry. And we're not just mindlessly drinking a cup of water. We are now entering into a sacred ritual of gratitude and thanksgiving and acknowledging that in that cup there is a manifestation of creation that we need to live. And the more we transform those kinds of experiences with our food and with the herbs and with everything we're doing, the more those things change. So in other words, if you just have a cup of a simple herbal tea and you don't pay any attention to it at all, it's not going to do much for you. But on the other hand, if you start interacting with it and you're really paying attention to it, then one of the first things that you will notice is you really taste that chamomile tea like you've never tasted it before. Why? Because your mind is fully present. Now, if your mind is fully present and you are really tasting that chamomile tea, what has happened to the plant? Okay, well, the plant is an aspect of creation. A plant is one of the creator's creations. And the plant has its own intelligence. It's just as complicated as the human body. And it's creating these compounds from the universal elements. That plant is getting nutrition from the soil, which is one of the forms of God. And it's getting nutrition from water, which is one of the forms of God. And it's getting sunlight, which is one of the forms of God. And it's breathing air, which is one of the forms of God. And so the plant is a form of God, biologically, scientifically. And it's full of these compounds. And then you make it into a tea, and that tea is full of this sacred divine intelligence. Now, the question is, are you going to notice that or not? And so if you notice it, then what has happened is that your mind, by being fully present with your cup of chamomile tea, has opened your receptivity to the gift of the plant, which is its compounds, its aromas, its therapeutic benefits, which is intelligence of the biosphere, which is the intelligence of creation. And therefore, by being fully present, you are making yourself highly sensitive and highly receptive to the influence of the plants. Then you drink your chamomile tea and you will feel all these body sensations starting in the mouth, spreading through the brain, spreading through the throat, spreading through the whole body. And you may have an experience of that simple chamomile tea that is like a revelation. You've never felt chamomile tea like that. And what changed it? Your own mind. You were present. And because you were fully present and fully paying attention, you were highly receptive and you were actually feeling what the plant is giving you. Now, if you feel that level of body sensations, what's happening? If you can feel that level of body sensations, then what's happening is that by being fully present with the plant, that you are potentizing its effects. All right. And so this is the answer to your question. How do we integrate spiritual practice into healing modalities? It's all about being fully present so that we can interact with the intelligence that's in all the different gifts that we are being given of healing, whether it's water or fire or air or plants or food or nutrition or rest or sleep or breathing or any of these things. The more we are fully engaged with them, the more we potentize them, the more we become sensitive, the more we become responsive. And therefore, a simple cup of chamomile tea can have a profound effect if we are approaching it in a spiritual way. Now, we find that this is fully integrated in all of these traditions everywhere in the world. That rituals, prayer, mantra, song, visualization, incantations, okay, invocations, okay, everything has the same basic function, which is to recognize and potentize that which is already sacred. And therefore, this enhances the ability to heal. And even if the disease is not curable, what happens is that we can become people who are much more spiritually engaged in daily life. So that's a little perspective on your very astute observations.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Another thing I'd like to share in the Jewish tradition is that we have a special blessing that we say before consuming different types of food. So if we're about to eat a fruit or a vegetable that comes from a tree, we say, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the tree." And then if it's something that comes from the ground, we say, "Who creates the fruit of the ground?" And then, if for grains, there's another special blessing, and for bread, there's a specific blessing, and even for water, there's a specific blessing. And if you're drinking the water because simply because you're thirsty, there's one blessing. But if you're drinking the water for a different reason, like let's say you're taking medicine or something like that, there's a different blessing that you would say that would be more geared towards healing. And so I think that ties in to the things that you're saying, that in different traditions, we have different ways of acknowledging the food that we eat and its divine composition and it as a divine gift, and to really be appreciative of that. And when you're eating or slaughtering animals, the Native Americans had a certain way of dealing with death and thanking, being thankful for the death of the animal. Also in Judaism, I'm training to do kosher slaughter for kosher animals and kosher meat and things like that. And we also have various traditions and blessings that we say in every stage, not just for killing the animal, but even covering up its blood and things like that. So it's all about mindfulness and understanding the relationship between what we're eating and the divine, including the medicines. And I love what you said about suffering also. And I would just want to add a comment, which is that the suffering could be for our own personal growth and healing, as you mentioned, but sometimes also that the suffering is not for us, not for our own healing. It could be for the healing of our family, it could be for the healing of our community, it could be for the healing of our country, our time, our generation. There's many sages that have suffered not just for themselves, but for a cause, for a movement, and it may or may have not, involved physical sickness, but suffering nonetheless is a form of, illness, dis-ease, so to speak. So that's a
Yes.
beautiful way to look at disease and suffering, is that spiritually there is a greater purpose for it, and there's communication going on between the divine and ourselves through suffering.
Yes. Well said.
All right. Well, we've been talking for a long time, but it's not getting boring at all. That's for sure. But just to respect everyone's time, I just want to talk about what you do, how you help people. Right now, you've done many things, with your work with the Shift Network and plant medicine and the Plant Medicine Summit also. Um, can you talk about maybe those things, or also what you do right now and how people can get in touch with you and connect with you
Mhm.
and work with you, things like that?
Yeah, thank you. Uh, Basically, this is what I do. I offer telemedicine consultations. I was in clinical practice for decades, and I was also traveling and teaching extensively in live events with, audiences large and small. And I scaled back on that when the pandemic started, and I was already teaching a lot online and doing telemedicine, but that is basically what I've been doing for the last 5 years exclusively. And these services are over at my website, and my primary website address is crowconsultations.com, and that's CROW consultations, plural.com. And on that website, I have an archive of online courses. And the courses are of two types, because basically my work is in two parallel tracks. One is that I'm a meditation teacher and incorporate that into the healing process for people. And so there are meditation courses that are especially relevant for people who are working to get well, and self-inquiry, self-exploration. And I'm very non-dogmatic. I'm non-sectarian. I'm not presenting myself as a Buddhist or, a Taoist or anything. I'm presenting myself as a Westerner who has trained extensively in these traditions and translated them into what is important to me personally, and sharing that with people in a very non-sectarian kind of way. And so the spiritual practices that I offer um, are practiced by many people. I have an online sangha that meets, a meditation group that meets. I have, extensive experience with a great diversity of people in the meditation training. But then I also have courses that are medically oriented, courses on detoxification and digestive function and so forth. And I have the telemedicine consultations, and my specialty seems to have become integrating natural medicine with allopathic medicine because the majority of people that I work with are actually uh, having fairly serious health challenges. Not always, but I deal a lot with um, cancer treatment, how to use herbs with uh, chemotherapy, autoimmune stuff, many, many complicated things. And so my work with herbal medicine is very oriented to people who are also using allopathic medicine. Not always, but a lot of it. That's just kind of where everything is going these days anyway. More and more people need allopathic medicine as the population gets older. And so I spend a lot of time talking with people about their choices. I'm like a medical advocate, really. I teach what's called clinical level self-care. We need to take care of ourselves, but it's got to be really educated. And so I help people a lot with complicated decisions about, do you really need to start statins, or can you manage your cholesterol naturally? What are the risks and benefits of these drugs? All these kind of things. It's a fairly complicated practice. But that's what I offer, online courses. And then, as you mentioned, the Shift Network, if you go to theshiftnetwork.com, you will see that they have a variety of things that are mostly in the, new age genre. But if you just put in my name, then you'll see a large archive of my courses, which have to do with aromatherapy and essential oils and herbal medicine and integrating spirituality into herbal medicine. And we are launching a very large new training program over there shortly, so I'll go ahead and mention it, which is medical level detoxification, and it's how to use natural medicine for ongoing protection against some of the new really serious toxins that people are exposed to, the particulate matter from the wildfires and microplastic pollution and the endocrine disrupting compounds and things like that. So it's pretty high level detoxification. In my practice, I also help a lot of people who have hurt themselves with natural medicine, and especially with excessive and incorrect detoxification. People who have lost their gallbladders because of gallbladder flushes and things like that. So I help people kind of recover from natural medicine also. So that's my practice, and that's over at crowconsultations.com. And again, thank you for the opportunity to mention that.
Absolutely. And you have the clinical level self-care for people who are seeking their own holistic health and healing, but you also have the professional consultations, right? For
Mhm.
clinicians, practitioners, doctors, healthcare providers, etc., who want to provide their own clients and patients with holistic integrative care.
That's another aspect of this. Some practitioners do consult with me, and the way that we do it is that sometimes we have a group consultation. So I work with different kinds of clinicians, and sometimes it will be a Zoom call, a group consultation between myself and that clinician and the patient.
Mm.
And that gives the clinician the opportunity to observe my line of questioning, my thinking, my diagnostic process, treatment process, and so forth. Or sometimes clinicians just refer patients directly to me, or sometimes, we get the clearance from the patient, and they're not there, but I talk with the clinician about their case. So those are all things that are also available professionally.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank you so much.
sharing your heart and your rich experience throughout the years with us. And I hope to follow you and see what else comes about with your
Thank
with
you. Well, thank you for your good work and for your interest and sincerity.